Nature is dominated by the laws of the jungle. And the laws of the jungle always favor the strong over the weak. In the jungle, monsters are those who rule. But we humans crafted out of the chaos of the jungle safe spaces, villages, cities, palaces, castles, where we could establish noble law, laws that are separate from the jungle, laws that encouraged things like teamwork, loyalty, and charity. Laws that allowed us frail humans to bind together as teams and take down lions, tigers, bears. These noble laws empowered us to create machines and institutions. And when these machines got advanced enough, they gave us the power to defeat nature. And from there, people began to wonder if these invisible laws that we obeyed, that gave us power over nature, were in fact the true laws of reality. We noticed that when we bowed down and worshipped these laws, we would get raised out of the mud into glorious cities of hygiene, power, health, and civilization. And these cities were far from cruel towards individuals. These cities would protect the weak from the ruthless monsters that lived in the jungle and the ruthless, monstrous attitudes that still existed within us. And people began to think that the God who created this reality and added in those invisible, noble laws seemed to like people as long as they obeyed his rules. But obeying his rules was not straightforward. They required immense sacrifice. Every time we were betrayed, our emotions would boil up inside of us and call us back to the law of the jungle and say we should get violent vengeance and retribution for what had happened to us, instead of appealing to the noble system of justice that had been built in the city. And in these moments, we would have to sacrifice those feelings and their desires in order to obey the rules that this God had given to us. And it became even more profound. When the kingdom got threatened by monsters from the outside, young men would have to stand up and sacrifice everything they had in order to protect it. These men would stand up and sacrifice their gift of life, their ability to experience love, sex, food, for this lawful kingdom, for this strange abstraction that created all this abundance. And they would go out and die for it and never get the benefits from their actions. And so the idea of a hero began to form. But as these kingdoms swole, and as their wealth became unbelievably large, the people softened. The consequences of them obeying those emotions became so abstract and distant that people began to give in to their emotions. They began to disobey the laws that had built the city. And when they went back to obeying these emotions, these desires, they in effect went back to obeying and worshipping the laws, the gods of the jungle. And then the prophets of the old God would stand up and preach. They would warn them of the danger, but it would seem so ridiculous, so crackpot, so doomsdayish that most people would ignore them. Slowly, over time, the decay, the rot, the cracks, and the chaos would creep in. And then one day, people would begin to talk about it. Things have changed. Things aren't the same. And debate would start, but it would have been too late. And while they were talking this out, trying to figure out what was happening, out of nowhere the monsters from the jungle would show up around the fringes. storm in with their swords, engage in an orgy of violence and rape, and bring everything down to the savage law of the jungle once again. Back in the jungle, people would then have to collect together and build a new safe space and start the whole process again. And over many cycles of this, people began to realize and document exactly what was happening. They began to see that this battle to keep the kingdom together did not happen on the fringes when the monsters showed up. Every moment when those emotions bubbled up inside the psyche of the individuals who made up the kingdom, that moment arose for them to disobey their principles, disobey their God, their noble laws that had got them there. And that individual gave in to that. That brought them like a domino one step closer to the entire thing collapsing. And so they began to see the war that existed inside all of our souls. It was the voice of the noble law versus the desires of the jungle world. And in every moment, we had to sacrifice one in order to have the other. And whatever we sacrificed here is what determines the future of the kingdom. And here we find the wisdom in what Christ said when he spoke the words, "The kingdom of God is within." Because he knew that that war that goes on within our souls is where the kingdom is won or lost. Once we begin to lie to ourselves, we allow lies to creep into this massive machine, this massive state that we are a part of. And it becomes more and more difficult to manage it the more we are lying, the more we are giving in to our jungle emotions, as opposed to our noble logos. But this war is not straightforward. This war hinges on the most dramatic problem that faces any human throughout their entire life. Why do we suffer? You will hear people talk about the most important value being empathy, understanding other people's suffering. You will see in everybody that they are simply motivated to get away from pain and towards pleasure. You will see that we are always fighting against the strange heaviness and harshness and embarrassment and sadness and pointlessness of the world. All the religions speak the same words. They say to live is to suffer. But our suffering is different than the physical suffering of, say, animals. We struggle with crises of meaning, of purpose. We struggle with why. But the glory of humanity is that if we can get to a why, we are able to push through an immense amount of suffering because we can see a future, a reason to do it. We can work hard on the farm during the winter because we know that it will bear fruits in the summer. If you could not visualize those beautiful harvests in the summer, you would not be able to motivate yourself. But we are blessed in that way. When the boxer is on the ropes and he is spent, he's getting beaten up, you see his coach leap in, slap him in the face. The coach doesn't scream to him technicalities. The coach spills into his soul. Why? What are you fighting for? Think of the reality you will have if you achieve, if you push through this. The coach will conjure up images of his family who needs to eat, his wife who he loves, his muse. He will decorate a kingdom in his mind with a queen and with many beautiful children. And the boxer will get up, vitalized by this idea, a non-physical idea, and that will carry him through. Without this, he will roll over and die. This archetype of the kingdom is what gives us the reason to suffer. This is the dream that always conjures up within the human mind in order to justify why we fight. Perhaps it's just a family home, perhaps it's an entire Roman state. But nonetheless, we are always fighting for a kingdom. It is that great future that we are fighting for. It is the most stable and permanent and reliable archetype that we can find. It is an incredibly powerful tool for predicting how humans will behave. You can offer someone a 25-year debt. You can make them your slave if you promise them a kingdom which they can be king and raise their own family. And in this archetype we also find the most dangerous instinct that everybody is so afraid of nowadays, the tribal instinct, the instinct of binding together around one unified cause. You see this instinct get triggered in football matches when people gather together around the idea of the great team. They roar in unison as one. They give up their individual rational instincts to be part of the collective, to experience that Dionysian power of being part of a chant, to be part of an army. And you can see people get profound healing off this. This is how much they need it. If you take away all kingdoms, all unities, all tribes from people, they lose meaning and they suffer more. They go into isolation. It wears away at their soul. Their physiology starts to degrade. Loneliness destroys them. Without purpose, they need to sedate themselves. Without something to fight for, they see no reason to live. And so we see how powerful a motivating factor this is. People would rather die for something that means something than live a pointless life. And so we can be sure that because everybody suffers, whatever they are dreaming about as their kingdom, as the justification for their measly life, they will take very seriously. And the challenge becomes when these dreams clash. When we have a billionaire like Trump who has a vision of a strong American nation, which contrasts very harshly against a billionaire like George Soros, who visions a world without nations. And it becomes a dogfight between these two men and their beliefs and their dreams. We had the vision in Ireland of a unified Ireland versus the people who believed that we should accept the divided Ireland like we have today, and we went to civil war over this. That was after we had the vision we should take our country away from the British Empire, but the British had their vision of keeping their kingdom together. You have Karl Marx, who had the vision of the global communist state. And from that great tension, you had Adolf Hitler with his vision of the Third Reich to fight against that. You have Edward Bernays and his vision of creating the American dream, a democratic utopia, an open world where everybody can trade freely. And that would clash with the vision of the Catholics, of maintaining a Christian kingdom, which did not allow its values to change. You have the modern European Union unifying all of Europe under one flag, whereas you have modern Duginism, which ambitions to take Europe, Russia, the Middle East and China and unify them all together as Eurasia. You have the people in Silicon Valley dreaming of a technological utopia where machines free us all to become super creatives. The complexity of the modern world and modern politics is how all these dreams are fighting against each other for life. And the question is, which do we choose? Are we truly in a postmodern situation where all of these are relative and we can never know for sure which of these is correct? Or could it be more black and white? The way pagans visualized kingdoms and tribes is that there was a god who ruled. This god always personified the values that held together that kingdom or that tribe. And so it seems that this archetype of the god above the kingdom is important, because whichever one we worship determines which kingdom we receive. And it is not difficult to see that some kingdoms are better than others. The modern world is a much preferable place to live than a Marxist world. When the people of Europe gathered under the Christian god, they built Christendom, one of the most prosperous kingdoms to ever exist. And then Russia was taken over by a new god, the god of Marxism, the god of equality. And within 50 years, one of the richest kingdoms in the world was broke and shattered after genocide. In this world of ideas, it's always floozy, it's always difficult, but there are some reliable things we can attach onto. If we were to talk in a physics sense of reality, when you have a system like the universe, you will notice a phenomenon which people call entropy. And that is the tendency for this universe to try equalize out. You get a hot cup of coffee and put it in a cold kitchen, and over time, the cup of coffee's temperature will equalize with the room around it. The glorious, hot, delicious cup of coffee will die in order to match the world around it. And this is like our universe. Our universe is dominated by this entropy. It is a frightening thing. No matter what you build, over time the weather, all the forces of entropy will chew away at it until it turns back into sand. But there's something very special about life. Life is anti-entropic, and it is a mystery. We have no idea why. This manifests as ideas. To be entropic means that you are equalizing. And so the god of death would be a god of equality. And this is exactly the language that Marx used. Marx was looking to make everybody equal. And what he did in the end was murder most people, destroy their potential, flatten everything, and take that Russian state from being a huge stand-up society into a wasteland. Whereas life is about inequality. It is about judgment. It is about quantifying if you are good enough, if you are up to standard. And this is precisely the attitude that you find in the Christian God. The Christian God does not treat you as equal. He treats you as equal under his judgment. He will judge you based on your deeds. And so if you are capable, if you prove yourself, you will get rewarded. And so in this physics idea of an equalizing energy versus a life-creating energy, we see a very powerful way to ground a law and a God to build a kingdom.